This training lesson for Visual App Builder Pro will cover the topic of windows and modal dialog boxes. Within a Pocket PC project, you will only have one modalist window that will appear in this list of windows. Within a PC application, you would actually be able to define as many modalist windows as you liked and be able to navigate between them, generally by creating an entry in your menu. We'll save the menu entries for a later training topic. For this training topic, we'll go over modalist windows and modal dialog boxes for a Pocket PC project. Modal dialog boxes are also used extensively within PC applications as well. If we double click on any of the entries in the modalist window list, it'll jump us over to the object methods. In this case, that allows us to do the controls, to add controls and to assign actions to those controls for the particular window. Now for Pocket PC projects, the windows automatically size to the correct size for the Pocket PC device. These types of controls on the control toolbar should look familiar to a Visual Basic or Visual C programmer. They're very similar, along with the control alignment buttons down at the bottom of the screen. To start with, we'll go ahead and add some buttons for a Pocket PC project. We like to go ahead and just navigate from the main window within this project using buttons. Once we add a button to the window by clicking on the button icon on the toolbar and then clicking on the window itself, we can now assign properties. You'll notice that the window or the object that has a dotted line around the object itself is the one whose properties that you can set down here in the Properties dialog window. So if we click down here, you'll notice that the entire modalist window has the dotted line around it, and therefore the properties that we're setting are specific to that window, whereas if we click on the button itself, now the properties are specific to that button. So we'll go ahead and give this button a name, like function 1, and the caption refers to the text that will actually appear on the button itself. Now we can make this the default push button, which means if the user pressed enter key while this window was active, this function would be the one that would be performed. And we can also attach an image file to that button so that it would actually have a picture on the surface of the button. Now the size of the button does not need to be the shape that we see here. We can basically make it any size that we want, and up to and including the basically entire size of the window itself. Any of the blue squares you can use for changing the size of the button. Once the button is defined, we can actually right-click on that button and select an action for that button. In this case, we'll want to, before we do that, actually create a new procedure. So we'll go under the Edit menu and create a new procedure. Give this procedure a name, function 1. By convention, we like to use the Calculate Miscellaneous screen as the entry point for each procedure so that we can initialize any variables that need to be initialized for that particular procedure. Once we click OK and this new procedure appears in our list of procedures, then when we click on Action, these are all the actions that will be performed when this button is clicked in this case. The events that appear are going to be unique for the type of control that you've got on the window itself. In this case, within Visual App Builder button, you can respond to a user interface action of either button click or right button down, and these are very standard Windows messages that we're responding to. So again, if you have any background in Visual Basic or Visual C, this should be very familiar to you. It's a very event-driven type of processing. In this case, we'll respond to a button click, and you'll notice that the list of procedures that we have here available to execute once the button is clicked are the same as the list of procedures over here. So we'll select function 1, click OK, and we'll click Closed because we are done. The Edit and Delete buttons are used just to manage this list of functions, because you actually can have more than one action associated with a type of control. When we get into list controls, we actually will use that type of capability. But for a button, this is generally what we do. And so now when the user clicks on this button, it'll actually go off and execute this particular function. Let's go ahead and add one more button here. And for this button, let's call it Log On. Actually, let's call this logon button for the name of the control, just so we can identify that control when we see list of controls later in the project as a type of button. And we'll create a new procedure, call it logon. Again, give it a type of calculate miscellaneous, so we can set any values that we need to on entry. Again, we're going to select the logon button, right click, choose actions, and on a button click we will select the procedure logon to execute whenever that button is clicked. Now we'll go into, by clicking on the item in the list of procedures called logon, it will actually list all the objects within the logon procedure. We'll use the add button to create a new object, and the type for that object will be modal window. So now on entry, well, I will double click here on the logon object. We'll see that that's a calculate miscellaneous object. We're not going to initialize anything yet, but once this calculate miscellaneous object finishes executing, we will go to the logon modal. Now the logon modal window, you'll notice, looks very familiar to the modalist window, which is the main window for the Pocket PC application, with the exception that it already has predefined an OK and cancel button. I'm going to go ahead and move those down here to the bottom of the screen, and I'm going to give this, by clicking on the modal dialog itself, I can now set the properties for that modal dialog. And one of the things I'm going to change here is the caption itself to simply be logon, and that's what appears in the blue title bar up here. And now I can go ahead and, just as in the modalist window, I can go ahead and assign controls. And so in this case I'll put a couple of controls here for static text and a couple for entering text. And for the first one, we'll prompt for a username, and in the second, for a password. We can resize these controls, and by clicking on one control and then doing a control click, we can highlight more than one control at a time. The one with the dark blue boxes as opposed to the outline blue boxes is the anchor, which means that if you use any of the positioning controls, alignment controls down at the bottom of the screen, the anchor will remain the reference point. And so by clicking on this align left edge, you'll notice that all the controls will align with the anchor's left edge. Go ahead and move these edit controls over, and we can do the same thing for the edit controls. The one with the dark blue, this control here will be the anchor, and so if we align the left edges, this one will move over to the left a little bit so that they are in alignment. So this is how we can make the appearance of the controls correct. Now we're going to want to capture a couple of variables, one for the username and one for the password, in order to make this modal dialog functional. We'll go ahead and click on the Object Methods tab again, get us back to our modal window definition, and we'll go ahead and click on this edit control, and we'll give it a name of username edit, and we'll assign the variable username. This will allow us to capture into this variable called username whatever the user enters into this control at the time that we actually execute the application. We'll do the same with the password. And again, we'll capture that into a variable called password. In this case, we'll use the attribute called password, which will use the asterisk character to hide the user's entry, which is typical for passwords. You notice we can also specify more than one line to be able to do long text entries, to specify only numbers for quantity type of entry, or to force upper or lower case to make it easier to match with a database entry of usernames and passwords. It may be all forced to uppercase as well. We'll go ahead and connect the logon dialog to our main window now. We'll select on the Object tab, double click on our main window, and we've already done an action so that when the user clicks on that logon button to bring up the logon procedure, and within the logon procedure, after we go through the entry point, we bring up the Modal logon box. So we'll go ahead and save this. It'll prompt us for where to save our project as, with an initial name of untitled. By convention, we usually save our project files within the Retriever Software folder. I'll go ahead and create a new folder called Test, and I'll rename our project to Test and save it here. You can assign a password. This gives you the capability of distributing your application without having your customer have access to the actual source code or Visual App Builder project files, if you will. In this case, we'll leave the password as blank. It'll ask us whether we want to copy the project to the download folder. The download folder is where the actual device, whether it be wireless or a batch device, will download the project for, and where it will check for new versions of the projects that you may have deployed there. So for the moment, we'll go ahead and click on yes. It'll tell us that it's done populating that download folder. The download, upload, and archive folders will be a topic covered in a later training lesson as well. And at this point, we can go ahead and, under Tools, select the simulator and actually see what our application is going to run like. It's going to look like at execution time. So you'll see here's our function 1 and logon buttons. We don't actually have anything in our function 1 yet. But if we go ahead and click on our logon button, you'll see that it goes ahead and pops up our Modal dialog box, and we can go ahead and do some data entry. At this point, one would normally go to either a flat file with employee usernames and passwords and do a validation, or go over a wireless connection, go directly to a SQL database and do the same validation, when we will be covering those in a training lesson on SQL topics here shortly. But in this case, whether we click the OK or the cancel button, we'll notice that we come back to our main window. Now these are the basic concepts of Windows and Dialogs, and we'll flesh this out with some more details on functionality available within Windows and how to add more capabilities to them as we go through the training lessons.